Hi, this is Von Herzog here at the Social Club, and today we're going to be discussing bit depth, what resolution you should be running your DAW at, and why. Today, I'm going to talk to you about bit depth. But before we get started, I want to send a huge shout out and a big thank you to my patrons on Patreon. Zarina, the very first member of the Social Club, Annie, Tom from Liquid Modern, Brian and Sarah from the Permanent Record Podcast, Valingo, my partner in VHXRR, Rob Rowe, and Thorson. Thank you all for joining the Social Club. I look forward to talking to you all, forming a bigger family. So far, it's been great. If you have any questions, please reach out. And if you want to know how you can join, check out patreon.com/Social Club Sound and see if any of the tiers fit what you're looking for. Let's start at the beginning. Bit depth. What is it? In short, it's the amount of binary digits encoded in each sample. So where your sampling rate determines how many snapshots are being recorded per second, the bit depth determines the resolution of those snapshots. Every bit that you increase, you double the resolution, which is important to note. Where like an 8-bit file only has a dynamic range of 48 decibels, a 16-bit file has 96. So it makes sense. It's easy to follow. By the way, if you can hear Sherman snoring in the background, apologies. He's my English bulldog. He snores all day long. He's a big lump on the log, but I love him more than anything. So there's really only two things that are affected by your bit depth. It is your dynamic range and your signal to noise ratio. Signal to noise, we can kind of gloss over. It's, the ratio between the noise floor and the program level of your sound. The human ear is capable of distinguishing about 140 decibels of dynamic range. Now, that is from the quietest sound that we could possibly hear to the loudest we can hear before our eardrum just about bursts. It's 140 decibels of gradation. This is important to note. Your bit depth has no bearing on your frequency response. Your frequency response is dictated by your sampling rate. And the frequency response is always half of your sampling rate. As we learned in my gated reverb video, that is the Nyquist frequency. And the Nyquist frequency is the effective sampling rate of a sampler, which is always half of its total sampling rate. 16-bit audio only has a dynamic range of 96 decibels, less than what we're capable of distinguishing. So we might be able to distinguish that 16-bit sounds a bit more closed in than 24-bit. I mean, we are talking very finite types of things here, because for the most part, dynamic range in pop music is about 5 to 6 decibels. It's not this huge range. But how much headroom you have up top really does matter. So what happens if we go up to 24-bit? Well, you have 144 decibels of dynamic range now, which puts it past what humans are capable of perceiving. So 16-bit maxes out at 96 decibels, and the human ear maxes out at 140 decibels, and 24-bit maxes out at 144 decibels. What does 32-bit max out at? Still 144. Let me explain why. I soloed a piano from my VHXRR song, Don't Let Go, for this example, and I saved it as 24-bit and 32-bit floating point files. We're going to listen to them back so we can try and discern if there's any difference between them. Here's the 24-bit version. Lovely sounding. Now, let's listen back to the 32-bit version. I couldn't tell a difference. And you want to know why? There isn't one. They're identical. And I can prove this to you. What we're going to do is we're going to listen to both of them. This is going to be a little loud, because it's playing twice as loud because two of them are playing at once. But if I take either one of them and invert the phase, like that, and now I play it, silence. Pure silence, because they are perfectly canceling each other out. One is exactly the opposite of the other, therefore no sound plays. If I were to mute one, you'd hear the other, and vice versa. That's called a null test, and that's how you can tell if you're genuinely reproducing identical audio. If you can invert it
and everything cancels, you don't hear anything back, you know you have an exact reproduction. So then why work in 32-bit? If 24-bit sounds exactly the same, what's the advantage? Or why add the extra size to your files that's going to take up more disk space?
The advantage to 32-bit floating point comes above 0. Check this example out.
Here I took those 24-bit and 32-bit floating point files from before, and I added 16 decibels of gain to them. And then I saved them out as new files. When I reopen them, and I go to play them back, they're terribly distorted because they're well above clipping. If we zoom in and we look at what these waveforms look like, look at that. Look how truncated that is. All the tops and bottoms of those waveforms are clipped. So when we listen to it back, it sounds terrible. Now, I'm going to play this back. Turn your volume down, because this is going to be loud, but I just want to illustrate what it sounds like. Sounds terrible, right? But here's the issue. If I go and I try and pull that down, the file's still clipped. So if I take that back down to negative 16, you know, roughly, and I play it back, still sounds terrible. The file's ruined. And we don't want ruined files. So now what? I have 32 bits. Well, how's that going to help?
So what happens if we go to 32-bit? Well, we don't gain any more resolution from the noise floor to 0 dBs on the fader. That stays fixed. What 32-bit gives us is this magic trick to where it will store the data above clipping. So let me show you how this might come into play, how you can use it to your advantage, and why, if you have the space for the files, you should be using 32-bit floating point.
Oh, it does help. Listen back to this now. When I mute the 24-bit and I play the 32-bit file that I lowered the volume on, it saved it. Oh, but how could this be? Well, here's how it works. 32-bit floating point uses those extra 8 bits to capture the data above 0 dB. 24-bit files only capture from the noise floor up to 0 dB. They cap out there. And that's why when I go to pull this gain down, there's no information there. That information is lost in that file saving process. But if you have 32-bit floating point, it saves the points above 0 to properly recreate the file if you lower the gain. And it can completely save your ass. If you hand somebody stems and they're clipping and they're 24 bits, you have to re-export all new stems. But if you gave them 32-bit floating point stems and a couple of them are clipping, they can pull the volume down. Now, I know you're saying, well, who would ever hand off clipped stems? Well, you might not realize it. A lot of current DAWs operate at 32-bit floating point or even 64-bit floating point. And what that means is they handle a lot of the gain staging to where if you end up clipping a channel, you might not know it because you won't hear it clipping because the DAW is operating in 32-bit floating point. However, when you go to save that mix out, if you save it as 24 bits while you're clipping that main channel, even though you might not hear it in your DAW, when that file saves, it will save clipped. And if you have a 32-bit floating point, it will save and it will sound clipped, but you can pull that gain back down then. So avoid the distortion, avoid all the potential headaches of clipped files, and work in 32-bit floating point. It's worth it. Let's say now you have your beautiful sounding mix of 24-bit or 32-bit floating point audio, but now you have to get it onto a compact disc. You want to print some CDs up and sell them. Well, you have to lower your bit depth down to 16 bits, and if your sample rate is anything other than 44.1 kilohertz, you have to resample to 44.1. So in order to avoid truncation distortion, which can happen when switching bit depths, when you're lowering your bit depth, you add something called dither. Dither is a very low-level noise that helps preserve the original audio file. So by adding a bit of noise in, the trade-off for the noise is that you're getting a more accurate reproduction of the original file. So when you're lowering to 16 bits, it's not necessarily as obvious that you're adding dither because you have 96 decibels of dynamic range. So you can put the dither 70 dB, 80 dB down, and it's not really noticeable when the music is playing. So to better illustrate dither as it's occurring, I'm going to show you an 8-bit file where the dynamic range is only 48 decibels, and therefore the noise floor is higher and it's easier to hear. So let's give a listen to this same piano sample, but now at 8 bits with no dither applied. And we're still in 48 kilohertz, so we're not resampling anything. We're only changing the bit depth. Did you hear how metallic that sounded there at the end? That is the effect of truncation distortion. It's very audible and noticeable. Now, we'll listen again. It almost sounds like white noise at the beginning and more like a metallic ringing towards the end, right? Well, let's listen now to that same file, but with dither applied, and see if it sounds more natural, even if there is noticeable noise. Obviously, you can still hear the noise, but the reproduction of the piano was far more accurate. So by trading off a little bit of noise, you're getting a more accurate sample reproduction. And you can see at 8 bits, the dither is noticeable without even, zooming into the waveform. You can see the dither there. So now I will show you the 16-bit version because it is much less noticeable at 16 bits, but still important to have. So let's listen to the 16-bit version with no dither and see if you can even pick up on it. It's there and it's subtle. Okay? You might have heard it, you might not have. With the YouTube codec, I'm not really sure if it'll come through all that great. But let's listen back now with the dither applied. That sounded great. And the beautiful thing is the dither is so much further down. Look how far I have to zoom in now before the dither becomes visible in the waveform. You really got to get in there because it's so far down now at 16 bits. So while it's not nearly as noticeable, it is still very important when you are lowering your bit depth resolution to add a low amount of dither. And there's different types of dither out there. The dither I used for this is by Isotope. It's their M-bit dither. And what I like about this is the noise shaping that's applied to it. The M-bit plus profile does tend to put the noise in the less noticeable parts of the frequency spectrum. So you don't hear as much hiss as you do in some of the other dither profiles. So it's worth checking out. Make sure you always add it. When you are finishing your files on your own and you're lowering bit depth, always add dither. And ask your mastering engineer, if you use one, if they're using dither on your tracks when they lower the bit depth, because they should be. And if they're not, come see me and I'll make sure I do it for you. So just to recap here, dithered audio post-bit depth reduction sounds identical to the original high-resolution audio with the addition of the dither noise. So the noise is definitely more noticeable at 8-bit, but at 16-bit, you can hear how the noise is pushed so far down, but it can help those truncation distortion errors as they occur, even at 16 bits. The type of dithering and noise profile you use can help change the sound of the dither and can determine if it's more audible or not. And that's pretty much it. That's bit depth explained. So if you can run your DAW at a minimum of 24-bit, or otherwise you're missing out on potential available resolution. And if you have the disk space, please run at 32-bit floating point so that you never find yourself with a clip file you have to re-export. And that wraps it up. I want to thank you for stopping by and checking out this video. If you aren't already following me, please follow me, subscribe to this channel. You can find me on Instagram and Twitter at Social Club Sound. And you can find me at patreon.com/Social Club Sound. Until next time, this has been Von Herzog from the Social Club.